Stop her!
The command thundered across the mountainside. Ada's heart slammed against her chest as she pushed herself faster up the slope. Loose stones shifted beneath her feet. Sharp rocks sliced into her skin, leaving thin trails of blood behind her. The wind howled through the darkness, tugging at her clothes, whipping her hair across her face. Still, she did not stop. Behind her, dozens of soldiers climbed the sacred mountain, their torches flickering like scattered stars against the black slope. One of them shouted that she was almost at the summit, that she could not be allowed to reach it. The soldiers pushed harder. Ada glanced over her shoulder, and the sight sent fresh fear racing through her. They were closer now. If they caught her before she reached the top, everything would be over before it ever began. For 2 days she had climbed this mountain. 2 days of hunger, of exhaustion, of wondering whether the old man's warning had been true. Now she was only a few steps from the answer. At the summit stood an ancient stone table carved from black rock, and resting upon it was a spear. A golden glow pulsed softly along its blade, slow and steady, like something breathing. The light seemed alive, watching her, calling her. The moment she saw it, something stirred deep inside her that she could not explain, as though she had been searching for this spear her entire life without ever knowing its name. She forced herself forward, step by step, her legs screaming. The soldiers were almost on her. Then she reached the stone table, and for a brief moment the whole world seemed to fall silent. Even the wind stopped. Slowly, she stretched out her trembling hand. The instant her fingers touched the spear, a force exploded from the mountain. The ground shook violently. Cracks raced across the stone beneath her feet. A roar rolled through the sky. Far below, the people of Doma Land looked upward in shock, because for 30 years they had known only darkness, and no one living had seen the true face of the sun. Now a single beam of golden light pierced that darkness and spread across the heavens like a blade cutting through a curtain. The impossible had happened. The curse was breaking. But Ada had no idea what she had just awakened. A secret buried for 3 decades. A secret stained with blood. A secret that began with a murdered princess, a stolen throne, and a king willing to destroy an entire kingdom to keep the truth in the dark. 30 years earlier, Doma Land had been a prosperous kingdom. Its rivers flowed year-round. Its farms stretched green across the valleys. Its people never knew hunger. At the center of it stood the sacred temple, a holy place where rulers went to seek wisdom before making decisions that shaped the land. The people believed the kingdom was blessed. And for a long time it was, until the night everything changed. Asen was not yet king then. The throne belonged to his elder sister, Princess Een. She was wise, compassionate, loved by everyone who met her, and destined to become the greatest ruler the kingdom had ever known. But whenever Asen looked at his sister, he did not see family. He saw the one obstacle standing between himself and the crown. Jealousy poisoned his heart slowly, the way rot spreads through good fruit. Year after year it grew. What began as quiet resentment thickened into obsession. Everywhere he went he heard the same words on the same lips. In the streets the people sang her praises, calling the kingdom blessed to have her, saying the gods themselves had chosen her. Each praise landed on Asen like a wound. He watched the elders seek her counsel. He watched hardened warriors bow their heads in respect when she passed. And the more they loved his sister, the more he feared that his own name would be forgotten entirely. The dark thoughts came soon after. As long as Een lived, he told himself, the throne would never be his. At first he tried to bury those thoughts, but ambition feeds itself, and with every passing year his hunger for power grew stronger than his love for his own blood. Eventually he made the decision that would curse the kingdom for 30 years. He would remove the only person standing between himself and the crown. But Een was loved across the whole land. If anything happened to her openly, the people would demand answers he could not give. So Asen waited, patient, careful, watching for the perfect moment. And during the sacred season of worship, he found it. The sacred temple stood high on the hill, lit by hundreds of flickering flames. It was a place where no weapon was ever meant to be raised, a place of truth and honor and the gods. Een often went there alone at night to pray for the kingdom, and Asen knew her routine better than anyone. He sent her a message claiming that an urgent matter concerning the future of the kingdom needed her at the temple after sunset. Trusting her brother completely, she went without hesitation. The temple was empty when she arrived. The priests had gone. The worshippers had returned to their homes. Only Asen remained. At first he spoke calmly, asking after the kingdom and its people. But beneath the calm was a storm that had been building for years, and finally it broke loose. He accused her of stealing the love of the people, of taking the honor he believed was rightfully his. She was stunned. She reminded him that they were family, that the kingdom was wide enough for both of them to serve. For the smallest moment, something in him hesitated, a flicker of the boy who had once looked up to his sister. But ambition had carried him too far down its road, and the hesitation passed as quickly as it came. And there, beneath the watchful eyes of the gods he claimed to worship, Prince Asen committed the unforgivable. Inside the sacred temple, he raised his blade against his own sister and unalived her. Then he buried the truth. Before dawn, loyal servants who knew too much were silenced. Evidence vanished. A false story was carried out into the kingdom. By sunrise, Princess Een was simply gone, and Prince Asen sat upon the throne. But the land itself remembered what had been done. The very next day, darkness swallowed the sky. The sun vanished. At first, the people believed it would pass. It did not. Days became weeks. Weeks became years. And still the darkness held. Crops withered in the fields. Rivers shrank to muddy threads. Hunger crept from village to village while parents watched their children grow thin. Yet the king never confessed. Instead, he gathered the frightened people and told them the gods were angry, that only absolute obedience could save them. And the people, having no other explanation for the endless night, believed him. That was how his reign of fear began. He forced the villagers to tear down the sacred temple stone by stone, and on the very ground where he had unalived his sister, he raised a magnificent palace. There was one more thing the kingdom whispered about in those early days. On the same night Princess Een died, her infant daughter vanished. Some said the child had been murdered with her mother. Some said the gods had carried her away. No one knew the truth, but the child had survived. And that child was Ada. She grew up far from the palace, far from the throne that was rightfully hers, far from the truth of who she was. Her childhood was hard in every way the darkness could make it. Food was scarce, work was endless, hope was rare. And as she grew older, people began to notice something strange about her eyes. They were unlike anyone else's, gold in color, bright, almost glowing faintly in the dark. The whispers followed her everywhere. Some said her eyes were a rare birthmark of fate. Others said she was the reason the kingdom had fallen into misery in the first place. Children avoided her. Adults lowered their voices and looked away when she walked past. She heard those whispers so often that they became a kind of background to her whole life. And once, as a small girl, she had overheard an old woman murmur that a golden-eyed child would one day return to break the curse. She had not understood it then. She had only understood that people were afraid of her. So Ada learned to live alone. She spent her days working in the cemetery outside the capital village, and the graveyard never lacked for work. The king's wars saw to that. Nearly every week the bodies of fresh soldiers arrived to be buried. While she dug the graves, she often found herself staring toward the distant palace, turning the same questions over in her mind. Why did life feel so unfair? Why did people fear her? Why had she always felt so different from everyone around her? She never got her answers, not until one morning when an old man appeared at the cemetery. His name was Baba Cato. For years, though Ada never knew it, he had watched over her from a distance, alongside an old woman she had never met, keeping her away from the large towns where the wrong eyes might notice her. For years, he had carried a secret that was heavier than she could imagine. But that morning, he looked terrified, hurrying toward her, glancing over his shoulder as he came. He told her she had to leave, that the king knew she was alive, The words froze her where she stood. He pressed a small bundle into her hands, food and a water skin and warm clothing, and told her the soldiers were already on their way. Then he told her the rest, the part that made the ground feel like it had vanished beneath her feet. For years the king had feared a prophecy, one that said the child of Princess Een would return one day and break the curse over the land. He had ordered his spies to watch for anyone with golden eyes, and the day before, someone had reported seeing hers. Standing in that cemetery, everything she had never understood finally fell into place. The whispers, the fear, the strange way people had always looked at her, the old woman's words she had overheard as a child. The king had been searching for her all her life. Baba Kato told her the sacred mountain was the only place left where the king's power could not reach, and that she had to go there now. Before she could ask him anything more, the distant sound of horns rolled across the valley. The soldiers were coming. He placed the bundle firmly in her hands and begged her to run. She hesitated, afraid, asking what would happen if he was wrong. The old man looked directly into her golden eyes and told her that for 30 years he had protected this secret, and for 30 years he had been waiting for her. Moments later, she was running toward the sacred mountain, with no idea that her journey was about to change the fate of an entire kingdom. Behind her, the horns echoed through the valley. The king's soldiers had arrived. From the top of a distant hill, Chief Agaba watched the villagers scatter in fear and ordered his men to search every house. For years, the king's spies had hunted the girl with the golden eyes, and now that she had finally been found, Agaba had no intention of letting her slip away. His soldiers stormed the cemetery. They were too late. Ada was already gone. Agaba knelt beside the fresh footprints leading away from the village, his eyes narrowing toward the mountain rising in the distance. When one of his men asked whether she was heading there, the giant warrior rose slowly and said what everyone already feared, that the sacred mountain was the only place beyond the king's reach. Then he ordered them to gather the men. The hunt had begun. Ada ran through the dry fields beyond the village, the bundle bouncing against her side, the wind carrying the sound of footsteps behind her. She tightened her grip and kept running. For 2 days she climbed the sacred mountain, and the climb was harder than she had ever imagined. Sharp rocks cut her feet. More than once, she nearly slipped into a deep valley hidden beneath the darkness. But every time she thought about turning back, she remembered the old man's words, and she pushed on. Agaba and his soldiers stayed close behind. The giant tracked her footprints across the mountain trails with a patience that never broke, because in all his years, no one he hunted had ever escaped him. On the second night, exhausted and starving, Ada finally reached a small cave near the summit. Inside, an old woman sat beside a fire, and she did not look surprised to see her. She said only that she had been waiting for her, and that Ada's mother had waited for her too. At the mention of her mother, Ada's heart nearly stopped. The old woman drew her to the fire and told her the secret that had been hidden for 30 years. On the night Princess Een was unalived, a loyal temple guardian had witnessed the crime. Knowing the king would come for the infant princess next, he had fled the palace with the baby in his arms and disappeared into the night. That guardian was Baba Kato. For all these years he had hidden the child from the king's spies, and this old woman had helped him do it, the two of them raising Ada from a careful distance while the whole kingdom believed the princess's bloodline had ended. Tears filled Ada's eyes as she listened. For the first time in her life, she understood the truth of herself. She was not an orphan the world had thrown away. She was the daughter of Princess Een, the rightful heir to Doma land. Before dawn, the old woman led her to the summit. There, resting on the ancient stone table from a distance, lay the spear, glowing with soft golden light, the symbols of the sun carved along its blade. The moment Ada saw it, she felt that same pull again, deep and wordless, as though destiny itself had been waiting on this mountain for her to arrive. But before she could reach it, shouts rang out from below. Agaba and his soldiers had reached the summit. With no time left to think, Ada rushed to the stone table and wrapped both hands around the spear. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the mountain exploded with light. A wave of energy swept across the summit. The earth shook and the sky roared. The soldiers were thrown backward off their feet, and even Agaba barely kept his footing. Far below, the darkness that had smothered Doma land for 30 years began to crack apart, and for the first time in a generation, sunlight broke through the sky. The curse was breaking. Fear scattered the soldiers. Some dropped their weapons. Others fled back down the slope. In the confusion, the old woman pulled Ada toward a narrow hidden path known only to her, and by the time Agaba regained control of his men, the girl was gone. As Ada descended the mountain, something remarkable followed in her steps. Wherever she walked, life returned. Green grass pushed up through the dead soil. The dry, cursed land began to heal beneath her feet. At first she was too shaken to do anything but keep moving, meaning only to run and keep running. But as she passed through the villages of Doma land, she saw with her own eyes what 30 years of the king's rule had done. Hungry children sat outside empty homes. Farmers stared hopelessly at ruined fields that would grow nothing. Families spoke in low, frightened whispers, afraid of the king's soldiers even in their own doorways. Then she overheard something that stopped her cold. Villagers were speaking of children taken from their homes, held now inside the palace for some dark ritual the king himself had ordered. Her heart sank. For her whole life she had run from fear, from the whispers, from a truth she never understood. But she could not run from this, not while innocent people suffered, not while children waited in the dark to be rescued, not while the man who murdered her mother still sat upon the stolen throne. Slowly, she tightened her grip on the spear. This time she would not flee. This time she would fight. Word of the miracle on the mountain spread quickly through the land, and with it spread her name. People learned that the girl with the golden eyes was the one behind the returning light, the healing fields, the cracking curse. And as she walked toward the capital, they began to follow her. At first, it was only a handful, a few desperate families who had nothing left to lose. But the further she walked, the more the crowd swelled behind her. Word ran ahead of her from village to village, and people who had lived their whole lives in fear stepped out of their homes to join the girl who was making the sun return. Dozens became scores. Scores became hundreds. Old men who remembered Princess Een wept when they saw Ada's golden eyes and fell into step behind her. Mothers carried their children on their backs to follow. A kingdom that had forgotten what hope felt like was remembering it all at once, and it was walking toward the palace. By the time Ada reached the gates of Doma land, she was no longer a lone girl fleeing in the dark. She led a river of people who had decided all together that they would be afraid no longer. And soon she stood face to face with the man responsible for 30 years of darkness. The king's soldiers moved to meet her, battle cries filling the throne room, steel flashing beneath the torchlight. For a moment, fear gripped Ada's heart and held it tight. But then she saw the frightened children tied beside the throne, and she knew that if she faltered now, they would die. She tightened her grip on the spear and drove its tip into the stone floor. A shockwave exploded outward. The palace trembled. Golden light raced across the ground like lightning, and the charging soldiers were hurled backward, some crashing into the pillars, others dropping their weapons as the force swept over them. Even the king stumbled where he stood, but one man remained standing. Chief Agaba planted his feet against the shaking floor, his enormous axe resting across his shoulders, his scarred face showing nothing at all. For years, the villagers had whispered his legend, the man who crushed every rebellion, the warrior who had never once lost a battle. He stepped forward slowly and told her that strength alone did not make a ruler, that he had served this kingdom his entire life. Ada lifted her head and asked him whether serving the kingdom meant helping a murderer keep the throne. For just a moment, something crossed his face, uncertainty there and then gone. He said his loyalty belonged to the crown. She told him his loyalty belonged to fear. The words struck harder than any blade. With a roar, Agaba charged. His axe cut through the air and Ada barely moved in time, the blade shattering the stone where she had stood. The villagers screamed. The children cried out. And still he came, again and again, each strike carrying enough force to break bone. Here the spear did not save her the way she needed it to. She moved across the throne room, the weapon glowing in her hands, but she did not strike back, because she did not yet know how. She was still afraid, still learning what the spear was, still a graveyard girl who had never fought a battle in her life. And Agaba was the greatest warrior the kingdom had ever produced. He drove her back across the chamber, and for a terrible stretch of moments it was clear she was losing. She stumbled. The spear nearly slipped from her grip. One blow grazed her and sent her to one knee, and in that instant she truly believed it was over. But kneeling there, half broken, she looked past Agaba to the children tied beside the throne, watching her with the last of their hope. And something in her steadied. When Agaba swung again with all his strength, Ada did not run. She raised the spear to meet the axe head-on. The weapons collided and a burst of light exploded between them, a shockwave rolling out across the whole room. When the light faded, the great axe had cracked straight down its middle. Agaba stared at the ruined weapon in his hands. Disbelief filled his face, but it was not the broken axe that defeated him. Standing there in the wreckage of his own certainty, the warrior finally understood the truth he had spent 30 years refusing to see. Slowly, he let the shattered pieces fall from his hands. Then he stepped aside. The king's face twisted with panic. He screamed at Agaba to kill her, shrieked that the warrior had sworn him loyalty. Agaba lowered his head and said the words that ended the reign of fear. His loyalty had never belonged to the king. It had always belonged to Doma land. The king's eyes went wide. In that moment, he understood that he stood completely alone. Desperation took him. Before anyone could move, he seized one of the young girls from beside the throne and dragged her against himself, and the child cried out in terror. He screamed at them all to stay back, his hands shaking, his eyes rolling wildly around the room, threatening that one more step would cost the child her life. Silence fell. The whole kingdom seemed to hold its breath. Ada looked at the frightened child. Then she looked at the king. For years she had imagined this moment, the man responsible for so much suffering standing before her at last. Yet all she saw now was a frightened old man hiding behind a child. The mighty king of Doma land had become nothing but a coward. She told him quietly that he had already lost. He tightened his grip and screamed that he was the king. And then Ada spoke the words the whole kingdom had waited 30 years to hear, that he had stolen the throne, that he had unalived his own sister. The king's face went pale. The throne room fell utterly silent. The villagers stared at him, and many who had only ever suspected the truth now heard it spoken aloud at last. She named the rest of it plainly, that he had lied to his people, that he had let them starve, that he had filled the whole kingdom with fear. Each word struck him like a hammer, and his stolen confidence crumbled to dust. Then Ada lifted the spear. The golden weapon blazed brighter than it ever had, and a beam of light shot upward from its blade. The palace roof split apart above them. The dark clouds that had smothered Doma land for 30 years trembled, and then the sky opened. Sunlight poured through the shattered roof. For the first time in a generation, pure daylight flooded the throne room, touching the floor, the walls, the faces of the people. And then it touched King Asen. The king screamed. Dark shadows poured out of his body like smoke. The evil he had hidden for 30 years finally dragged into the light where it could no longer survive. His strength drained out of him. The terrified child tore free of his loosening grip and ran to safety. The king collapsed to the floor, and the crown slipped from his head. As he looked up, his eyes met Ada's, and he froze. For the first time, he truly saw her. The golden eyes, his sister's eyes, the same eyes he had looked into 30 years ago in the temple. The memories crashed over him all at once. The betrayal, the murder, the child he had believed was lost forever. His lips trembled. Tears filled his eyes, because the truth was finally standing in front of him, and there was nowhere left to hide from it. Ada was no legend. She was the daughter of the woman he had murdered, and the rightful heir to everything he had stolen. Fear crossed his face, but Ada felt no hatred and no hunger for revenge. Only a deep and heavy sadness that an entire kingdom had been broken by one man's greed. She told him softly that he had been given 30 years to tell the truth. The king lowered his head, and for the first time in decades, he had no lie left to reach for. Ada lowered the spear. A final wave of golden light swept through the throne room, and the darkness that had kept the old king alive and powerful for 30 years drained out of him completely. Without it, his weakened body could no longer stand. His failing heart gave out, and moments later he drew his last breath and fell still. The stolen crown rolled across the floor and broke cleanly into two pieces. The reign of fear was over. For a long moment, no one moved. The throne room stood silent beneath the sunlight pouring through the broken roof. It was a strange silence, not of fear, not of sorrow, but the silence that comes when people witness something they never believed they would live to see. An entire generation had grown up never knowing what a clear morning sky looked like, and now they stood beneath one. Then the children who had been rescued ran to their families. Parents seized them and held them tight. Mothers wept with relief. Fathers dropped to their knees and thanked the heavens. Slowly, throughout the throne room, the sounds of grief gave way to the sounds of joy. Ada stood quietly among them and, for the first time since she had entered the palace, let herself breathe. The spear still rested in her hands, but it felt lighter now, as though the weight it had carried for 30 years had finally been set down. An old woman stepped out of the crowd, and Ada recognized her at once. The same woman she had passed suffering in the village. She looked at Ada with tears streaming down her face and told her simply that she had come back for them. Ada lowered her head, because no one had ever looked at her that way in her whole life. For as long as she could remember, people had looked at her with suspicion and fear, had blamed her for the kingdom's misery. Now those same people were smiling at her, and the feeling was almost more than she could hold. The village elders stepped forward through the parting crowd. The oldest among them carried a small wooden box worn smooth by time, holding it as though it were the most precious thing in the world. When Ada asked what it was, the old man smiled sadly and told her it had belonged to her mother. With trembling hands, she opened it. Inside lay a silver pendant shaped like the sun, untouched by all the years that had passed. The sight of it stirred something deep in her chest, a connection to a woman she had never been allowed to know. The elder told her he had served Princess Ine when he was young, that she had worn this pendant every single day. When Ada asked what her mother had been like, the old man's eyes went distant and warm, and one by one the elders answered her, that she had been brave, that she had been kind, that she had always listened to her people. As Ada listened, the tears came freely. For her whole life she had wondered who she was, and now, piece by piece, the answer was finally taking shape. The kingdom had not only lost a princess 30 years ago, it had lost its hope, and somehow, against everything, that hope had come home. The old elder placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and told her that when the people looked at her, they saw her mother again. All around the throne room, the villagers began to kneel, not because she carried a magical spear, but because she had chosen compassion in the very moment she held the power to choose revenge, the same choice her mother had made before her. And in that moment, Ada finally understood what it truly meant to lead. It was never about ruling people. It was about serving them. Later, as the sun set over a kingdom that could finally see it, Ada returned alone to the throne room. The palace was quiet, gold light spilling through the broken roof. Beside the throne stood an ancient stone pedestal marked with the symbol of the sun, the same symbol carved along the spear. Slowly, she set the weapon into its resting place. The moment the spear touched the stone, a warm golden light filled the chamber and rushed outward across the whole of Doma land. The rivers ran stronger. The fields grew greener. Life returned to the kingdom that had been dying for 30 years. And a gentle voice moved through the wind, saying that the land serves only those who serve the truth. Ada carried those words in her heart as she took her place as Queen of Doma land. Under her rule, peace returned, the people prospered, and slowly the old wounds began to heal. Years later, they still told the story across the valleys. The story of the girl with the golden eyes, who had spent her life feared and alone, who climbed the sacred mountain in search of the truth of herself, and came back down carrying the hope of an entire kingdom. Today, the world knows the mighty Thor as one of Marvel's most powerful figures, a woman who lifted a sacred weapon no one else could raise, and in doing so was found worthy of a power the world believed belonged only to gods. The world calls it fiction, but the blueprint for that story was never invented in a comic book. It lived in the ancient legends of Africa, in the tales of chosen women whose worthiness was measured not by strength, but by the truth they carried in their hearts. A weapon resting untouched, waiting, a power that only the worthy could awaken. A woman raised in hardship, doubted, feared, cast to the edges of the world she was secretly born to rule, who reached out her hand and lifted the very thing no one else could. That is not a modern invention. That is Ada. The mighty Thor was never made worthy by her strength. She was made worthy by her compassion, by the choice to protect the innocent when she held the power to do anything she wished. And in the end, that was the exact moment that defined Ada, when she stood over the man who murdered her mother, who cursed her kingdom, who stole 30 years of light from her people, and chose mercy over revenge. She wore no Asgardian armor. She carried no hammer forged by gods. She carried a spear of golden light and a pair of eyes that held the sun. But the thing that made her worthy of it was the same thing that has always made a hero worthy. Not the weapon in her hands, but the heart that decided how to use it. The real legends of ancient Africa were not simply stories told to pass the night. They were the original blueprint, the chosen daughter, the sacred weapon, the worthiness earned not through power, but through the refusal to let power corrupt her. Ada's story was almost lost to time, the way so many African legends were quietly buried and forgotten. But some stories refuse to stay in the dark. This is hers, and now you know where the legend of the worthy truly began.